The man in rags walked into his own bank and asked to speak to the manager. When they laughed and called him crazy, he smiled and said three words that changed everything. "I own this." The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Metropolitan Trust Bank in downtown Phoenix. The gleaming lobby buzzed with the usual rhythm of financial success, polished shoes clicking against pristine tiles, the soft hum of air conditioning, and the quiet confidence of wealth being managed. But none of the impeccably dressed staff noticed the figure approaching the entrance. Why would they? Marcus Rivera looked nothing like a billionaire CEO. His clothes hung loose and worn, fabric thin from too many washes. His beard was unkempt, streaked with premature gray that made him look older than his 42 years. A canvas messenger bag, patched with duct tape, hung from his shoulder. To anyone watching, he was just another casualty of the economic downturn. What they didn't know was that Marcus had spent the last 6 months planning this moment. 6 months ago, he'd received a letter that changed everything. It wasn't from a competitor or a board member. It was from Maria Santos, a single mother from South Phoenix who'd been trying to open a simple checking account for her daughter's college fund. The letter was handwritten, the kind you don't see anymore in a world of emails and texts. "Mr. Rivera," it began, "I know you probably won't read this, but I had to try. I've been to your bank 4 times now, trying to open an account for my daughter Sophia. She's going to be the first in our family to go to college, and I wanted to start saving. But every time I go in, they look at me like I don't belong. They ask for documents I don't have, fees I can't afford, and treat me like I'm asking for charity instead of wanting to be a customer. I work 2 jobs, and I'm proud of what I've built. But your bank makes me feel ashamed. I thought you should know." Marcus had read that letter 17 times. Each time, it hit harder. He'd built Metropolitan Trust from a single location to 150 branches across the Southwest. His net worth had crossed the billion-dollar mark 3 years ago. But somewhere along the way, he'd lost touch with the very people his bank was supposed to serve. So he decided to find out for himself. The plan was simple: go undercover as someone who needed help and see how his employees treated regular customers. He'd done corporate mystery shopping before, but never like this. Never as someone who looked like they didn't belong. Now, standing outside the glass doors of his flagship branch, Marcus took a deep breath. The security cameras couldn't see the steel in his eyes, the quiet determination that had built an empire. All they saw was another person society had forgotten. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The first person to notice Marcus was Jennifer Walsh, a loan officer who'd been with the bank for 3 years. She was 26, fresh out of business school, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that could sell anything to anyone with good credit. Her smile faltered when she saw Marcus approaching the information desk. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice deliberately quieter than usual. "I'd like to speak with someone about opening an account." Jennifer's eyes swept over him quickly. The worn clothes, the patched bag, the general appearance of someone who probably couldn't afford their minimum balance requirements. Her customer service training kicked in, but barely. "Of course," she said, though her tone had already shifted from welcoming to barely tolerant. "What type of account were you interested in?" "Something simple. Checking, maybe savings. My daughter's starting college next year." The mention of college made Jennifer pause. She glanced around the lobby, noting the other customers in their business suits and designer handbags. Marcus stood out like a stain on silk. "Well," she said, pulling out a brochure, "our basic checking account has a monthly maintenance fee of $25, which is waived if you maintain a minimum balance of $1,500. You'd also need to provide 2 forms of ID, proof of address, and an initial deposit of at least $50. Marcus nodded slowly. What if someone can't maintain that minimum balance? Jennifer's patience was already wearing thin. Look, sir, I'm going to be honest with you here. Banking isn't free. If you're looking for some kind of assistance program, you might want to try a credit union or community bank. I see. Marcus shifted his bag. And what if someone wanted to speak with a manager about their options? That's when Jennifer's professional mask slipped entirely. A manager? She let out a small laugh. Sir, the managers here handle investment portfolios and business accounts. They don't have time for... She gestured vaguely at him. Basic banking issues. If you can meet the requirements, great. If not, there are other options. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. This was exactly what Maria Santos had described in her letter. The subtle dismissal, the assumption that certain people didn't belong in their world of financial privilege. I'd still like to speak with a manager, he said quietly. Jennifer's laugh grew louder, drawing attention from other staff members. Look, I'm trying to help you here, but you're not listening. You want to open an account? Fill out the application. You want charity? Try the Salvation Army down the street. That's when Marcus heard it, the sound that would haunt him for months afterwards. Other employees were starting to chuckle, not loudly, not openly, but that quiet laughter of people who thought they were witnessing something amusing. Timothy Crawford, the head teller, leaned over to his colleague. "Another one of those," he whispered, just loud enough for Marcus to hear. "They watch too many movies, think banks hand out money to anyone who asks nicely." Marcus's hands clenched inside his jacket pockets. These weren't just employees. They were representatives of everything he'd built, and they were failing in the most fundamental way possible. "I understand your position," Marcus said, his voice still calm, but carrying something new now, something that made Patterson pay closer attention. "I'd really like to speak with the branch manager. Would that be possible?" Jennifer rolled her eyes. "Fine, let me get Mr. Patterson, but he's going to tell you the same thing." She walked away, her heels clicking against the marble with sharp irritation. She could hear her talking to someone in the back office, could catch fragments of the conversation. "Guy up front who won't take no for an answer. Looks like he hasn't showered in a week. Wants to talk to you about opening an account." When she returned, she had company. Daniel Patterson was the branch manager, a man in his mid-50s with silver hair and a suit that cost more than most people made in a month. He approached Marcus with the expression of someone doing a favor they didn't want to do. "I understand you have some questions about our banking services," Patterson said, extending his hand in a gesture that was more reflex than genuine courtesy. Marcus shook it, noting how Patterson's grip was deliberately brief and how he immediately reached into his pocket for hand sanitizer afterwards. "I'm interested in opening accounts for myself and my daughter. I was hoping we could discuss some options." Patterson glanced at Jennifer, who gave him a look that said everything. He sighed, the sound of a man whose valuable time was being wasted. "Certainly. Our basic checking account requires a minimum balance of $1,500 to avoid fees. Our savings accounts start at $1,000. We'll need employment verification, credit check authorization, and proof of residence. Can you provide those?" "What if someone's situation is more complicated?" "How complicated?" "What if they're between jobs, or their credit isn't perfect, or they're trying to rebuild their financial life?" Patterson's expression grew cold. "Then they might be better served by an institution more suited to their needs. Metropolitan Trust caters to customers who can maintain our standards and contribute to our growth. We're not a charity." The word hit Marcus like a physical blow. Charity. The same word Jennifer had used. The same dismissive attitude that had driven Maria Santos away. "I understand," Marcus said, quietly. "And what if I told you I could meet your requirements?" Patterson looked at him up and down again, more obviously this time. "Sir, I don't want to be rude, but our requirements exist for a reason. Banking is about trust and stability.
We need customers who can demonstrate both. And you've determined I can't demonstrate either? I've determined that your time and mine would be better spent if we were realistic about expectations." Marcus nodded slowly. The lobby had grown quieter, other customers and staff members subtly listening to the conversation. He could feel their judgment, their assumption that I was exactly what I appeared to be, someone who didn't belong in their world of financial privilege. "What if I told you," Marcus said, his voice still calm, but carrying something new now, something that made Patterson pay closer attention, "that I own this bank?" The silence that followed was absolute. Then Patterson laughed, not the polite chuckle of someone being diplomatic, but the genuine laughter of someone who just heard the most ridiculous thing imaginable. "You own this bank?"
Marcus reached into his jacket pocket. The phone that Marcus pulled out was nothing special, a standard smartphone, the kind anyone might carry. But when he pounded on and scrolled through his contacts, something in his demeanor shifted. The nervous, apologetic posture straightened. His voice, when he spoke, carried an authority that made everyone in the lobby pause. "Diana," he said into the phone, "it's Marcus. I need you to come to the Camelback branch immediately. Bring legal documentation of my ownership position in Metropolitan Trust, and contact our head of human resources. We need to have a conversation about staff training." Patterson's laughter died in his throat. There was something about the way Marcus spoke, not the desperate bluffing of someone caught in a lie, but the crisp efficiency of someone giving orders they expected to be followed. "Who is Diana?" Patterson asked, trying to maintain his skeptical tone but with less conviction than before. "Diana Reeves," Marcus replied, still holding the phone. "She's the Chief Operating Officer of Metropolitan Trust Bank. She should be here in about 10 minutes. Jennifer stepped forward, her confidence wavering. "Sir, this is getting out of hand. If you're having some kind of mental health episode..." Marcus turned to look at her, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that made her take a step back. It wasn't anger exactly. It was disappointment, so profound it was almost physical. "Mental health episode," he repeated quietly. "Is that your professional assessment of customers who don't meet your visual expectations?" Patterson cleared his throat. "Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but..." "No game," Marcus interrupted. "Diana will be here shortly with documentation. In the meantime, why don't you tell me about your customer service training program?" "Our what?" "Customer service training. What do you teach your employees about treating people with dignity? About not making assumptions based on appearance? About the difference between serving customers and serving your own prejudices?" The lobby was dead silent now. Other customers had stopped their transactions to listen. Several employees had gathered near the teller windows, drawn by the unusual confrontation. Timothy Crawford spoke up from behind the counter. "Man, you're really committed to this bit, aren't you?" Marcus looked at him steadily. "Timothy Crawford, employee ID 7749. You've been with the bank for 2 years. Your last performance review noted that you needed improvement in customer relations. Should I continue?" The color drained from Timothy's face. That information wasn't public. It wasn't something someone could just guess. Patterson stepped closer to Marcus, studying his face more carefully. There was something familiar about the man's features, something that nagged at the edge of recognition. "How do you know employee ID numbers?" "Because I sign the paychecks," Marcus said simply. Before anyone could respond, the lobby doors opened and Diana Reeves walked in. She was a woman in her early 40s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase and moving with the purposeful stride of someone who commanded rooms just by entering them. She scanned the lobby, her eyes finding Marcus immediately, despite his disguise. Her expression didn't change, but those who knew her well would have recognized the slight tightening around her eyes that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. "Mr. Rivera," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the marble expanse,
I came as quickly as I could. The effect was immediate and devastating. Patterson's face went white. Jennifer stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth. Timothy Crawford gripped the edge of his counter like he was drowning. Because Diana Reeves didn't just know who Marcus was. She'd called him by name. She called him Mr. Rivera. Marcus Rivera. The name on the brass plaque in the lobby. The name on the building itself. The name on their paychecks. "Thank you, Diana," Marcus said calmly, but now carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who'd never needed to prove who he was. "I think we need to have a discussion about how this branch treats its customers." Patterson tried to speak but only managed a strangled sound. Jennifer had gone completely pale, her perfectly applied makeup suddenly looking garish against her bloodless skin. Diana opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. "I have the documentation you requested. Certificate of incorporation, ownership records, your signature cards for the corporate accounts. Also, I took the liberty of reviewing the security footage from the last hour." She handed the folder to Patterson, who took it with shaking hands. As he opened it and saw the official documents, saw Marcus's signature, saw the proof of everything he just ridiculed, his legs seemed to give out. He sank into a nearby chair, the folder falling from his nerveless fingers. "Mr. Rivera, I didn't know. We didn't know." "No," Marcus said quietly. "And that's exactly the problem." Marcus walked to the center of the lobby, and despite his disheveled appearance, everyone's attention focused on him like he was standing behind a podium. The power in the room had completely shifted, and everyone could feel it. "6 months ago," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the space, "I received a letter from a woman named Maria Santos. She's a single mother, working 2 jobs, trying to save money for her daughter's college education. She came to this bank, my bank, 4 times, trying to open a simple account. 4 times she was treated exactly the way you just treated me." He paused, looking around the lobby at the faces staring back at him. Some employees had tears in their eyes. Others looked sick with shame and fear. "Maria's letter made me realize that somewhere along the way, I'd lost sight of what this bank was supposed to represent. So I decided to find out for myself how we really treat people who don't arrive in expensive suits driving luxury cars." Jennifer tried to speak, her voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Rivera, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean what?" Marcus asked, turning to face her. "You didn't mean to assume I was worthless because of how I looked? You didn't mean to suggest I visit the Salvation Army instead of your bank? You didn't mean to laugh at me when I asked for basic respect?" Tears began streaming down Jennifer's face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Marcus studied her for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler, but no less firm. "Jennifer, you've been with us for 3 years. In that time, how many customers do you think you've turned away with that attitude? How many Maria Santos stories have walked out those doors because you decided they didn't meet your standards?" She couldn't answer. She was sobbing too hard to speak. Marcus turned to Patterson. "Daniel, you've been managing this branch for 7 years. You just told me that Metropolitan Trust caters to customers who can contribute to our growth, and that we're not a charity. Is that the culture you've built here?" Patterson looked like he was going to sick. "Sir, that's not... We follow company policy." "What company policy? Show me the policy that says we judge customers by their appearance. Show me the training manual that teaches you to dismiss people based on their clothes. Show me where I ever said that banking was only for the wealthy." Silence. Marcus pulled out his phone again. "Diana, I want you to call an emergency meeting of all branch managers this afternoon.
I want to know if what I experienced here is happening at our other locations." "Already scheduled," Diana replied. 2 o'clock at headquarters." Marcus nodded, then addressed the lobby full of employees and customers. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand something. This bank exists to serve people, all people, rich, poor, young, old, perfectly dressed or wearing their work clothes. The moment we start judging people who deserve respect and who don't, we failed at our most basic purpose." He looked directly at Timothy Crawford. "Timothy, you called me another one of those. What did you mean by that?" Timothy's voice was barely audible. "People who come in looking for handouts. Handouts. I asked to open an account. I offered to make deposits. I wanted to become a customer. And you saw that as asking for a handout?" Timothy couldn't meet his eyes. Marcus turned back to the group. "Here's what's going to happen. First, we're going to contact Maria Santos and personally apologize for the treatment she received. Then, we're going to create a new customer outreach program specifically designed to serve people who've been excluded from traditional banking. We're going to train every employee in this system on what dignity looks like, what respect sounds like, and what service actually means." He paused, letting that sink in. "Second, we're going to review the performance of every employee who was involved in what happened here today."
3 hours later, the lobby was quiet again. Most of the employees had been sent home while HR conducted individual interviews. A crisis management team was setting up in the conference room. Diana was coordinating with legal and public relations. Marcus sat in Patterson's office, still wearing his worn clothes, reading through personnel files. The contrast was surreal. A billionaire CEO in rags, surrounded by the trappings of corporate power, methodically dismantling the culture of prejudice he discovered in his own company. Jennifer Walsh knocked on the door frame. She'd stopped crying, but her face was still red and puffy. "Mr. Rivera, could I speak with you?" Marcus looked up from the files. "Come in." She sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap like a schoolchild called to the principal's office. "I want you to know that I don't usually treat people like that. I'm not a bad person." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Jennifer, I don't think you're a bad person. But I think you've been working in a system that taught you to see certain people as less worthy of your time and respect. The question is, what are you going to do about it now?" "Whatever you want me to do. Additional training, community service, anything. I need you to know that I'm ashamed of how I acted today." Marcus studied her face. The fear was still there, but underneath it, he saw something else. Genuine remorse, a recognition that she'd been wrong, not just professionally, but morally. "Jennifer, I'm not going to fire you, but I am going to ask you to do something difficult. I want you to call Maria Santos. I want you to apologize to her personally, and then I want you to help design our new customer service training program, because you understand better than anyone what we've been doing wrong." She looked up at him with surprise. You want me to help fix this?" People who've made mistakes often become the strongest advocates for doing things right. You've seen firsthand how it feels to treat someone with prejudice. Use that knowledge to make sure it never happens again." Jennifer nodded slowly. "I will, I promise." After she left, Diana returned with an update. "The story's already starting to leak online. Someone filmed part of the confrontation on their phone. It's spreading fast." Marcus sighed. "Good or bad?" "Mixed. Some people are praising you for the undercover investigation.
Others are questioning why it took this long for you to discover the problem. The board wants to have an emergency call tonight. Marcus nodded. He'd expected that. Set it up. And Diana, I want to expand this investigation to all our branches. Not undercover, I want full audits of how we treat different types of customers. Real transparency. That's going to be expensive and potentially embarrassing. More embarrassing than continuing to operate this way? Marcus asked. We built this company on trust. How can we ask people to trust us with their money if we don't trust them enough to treat them with basic human dignity? Diana smiled slightly. You know, this is going to sound strange, but I think this might be the best thing that's happened to this company in years. How do you figure? Because for the first time in a long time, we're remembering what we're supposed to be. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same lobby where his transformation had begun, but everything was different now. The marble floors were the same, the architectural grandeur unchanged, but the atmosphere had shifted completely. Behind the teller windows, employees who'd been retrained or newly hired greeted customers with genuine warmth. The old assumptions about who belonged and who didn't had been systematically dismantled and replaced with something better. Maria Santos stood beside him, wearing a name tag that read Customer Relations Coordinator. She had been hired 3 months earlier to help develop and implement the bank's new inclusive service standards. How does it feel? Marcus asked her. Maria smiled, watching as a young man in work clothes was greeted respectfully by a loan officer. No judgments made, no assumptions voiced. Like what you always should have been. Marcus nodded. The changes hadn't been easy. They'd lost some employees who couldn't adapt to the new culture. They'd invested millions in retraining and community outreach. Their stock price had taken a temporary hit as investors worried about the costs. But they'd gained something more valuable, the trust of customers who had never felt welcome in traditional banks before. Their customer base had expanded dramatically. Their employee satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs. And most importantly, they were living up to the values Marcus had always claimed to represent. Jennifer Walsh approached them carrying a stack of customer satisfaction surveys. She'd become one of their most effective trainers, her personal experience with prejudice making her uniquely qualified to teach others about respect and dignity. The scores from last month? She said, handing Marcus the reports. 97% customer satisfaction across all demographics. Marcus flipped through the pages, noting particular comments from customers who praised the bank's welcoming atmosphere and respectful service. One comment caught his eye. For the first time in my life, I felt like a bank actually wanted my business. That's what it's all about, he said quietly. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus watched the steady flow of customers through the lobby. Businessmen in expensive suits, construction workers still dusty from job sites, college students opening their first accounts, elderly customers managing their retirement funds, immigrants starting new lives in America. All of them treated with the same respect, all of them valued equally. Timothy Crawford, who had kept his job after extensive retraining and a sincere commitment to change, was helping an elderly woman understand her account options. The patience and kindness he showed was genuine, the result of hard-won wisdom about the cost of prejudice. Daniel Patterson had not kept his job. The branch now had a new manager, Elena Rodriguez, who had come from a community bank with a strong track record of inclusive service. Under her leadership, the branch had become a model for the rest of the company. As Marcus prepared to leave, Maria Santos stopped him. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That day when you walked in here in those old clothes, did you know how bad it was going to be?" "I hoped I was wrong. I hoped that the letter you wrote was an isolated incident, that maybe you just encountered one bad employee on one bad day. But deep down, I suspected it was worse than that. And now? Now I know that changing a culture is harder than building a company from scratch. But it's also more important, because a company is just buildings and computers and quarterly reports. A culture is about how we treat each other. It's about whether we lift people up or tear them down. It's about whether we judge people by their circumstances or see them as human beings with dreams and potential. Maria nodded thoughtfully. You know, I still have that letter I wrote you. I keep it in my desk drawer to remind me why this work matters. I still have it too. It's framed in my office. Because sometimes the most important truths come from the people who have the least reason to believe in us. As Marcus Rivera walked out of the bank that had become a symbol of both corporate failure and corporate redemption, he reflected on the lessons learned. The undercover investigation had revealed more than just employee prejudice. It had exposed the systematic ways that financial institutions exclude and marginalize people based on appearance, class, and circumstance. But it had also revealed something else: the capacity for change. When people are confronted with the reality of their actions, when they see the human cost of their assumptions, most choose to do better. The story of Metropolitan Trust Bank spread far beyond Phoenix. Other financial institutions began conducting their own audits. Customer service training programs were overhauled industry-wide. The phrase, "banking while poor," entered the national conversation. Marcus never regretted that morning when he walked into his own bank disguised as someone who needed help. Because in seeking to understand how his company treated the most vulnerable customers, he had discovered something crucial about leadership. The true test of an organization's values isn't how it treats its most important clients, but how it treats the people who seemingly have nothing to offer in return. The billionaire in rags had become something more than a business success story. He had become a reminder that dignity isn't determined by net worth, that respect isn't earned through appearance, and that the most profound transformations often begin with the simple question, how would I want to be treated if I were in their shoes?